So I think we're all here. Hello, everybody. Welcome to meeting number 71 by Jove. As usual, we got good talks coming up. We've only got two this time, and it's your own fault because you're not volunteering enough talks to keep us going. We need more talks for April. So please do think of us and remember that they don't have to be finished academic papers here. It can be work in progress, it can be thoughts, it can be all sorts of things. So please do volunteer something or other. Otherwise, these sessions will just fade away, which would be sad. Anyway, but we do have the meeting in April. The 6th of April is our next Sunday meeting. And then the 26th of April is our one-day conference in Sheffield, Song and the Sense of Place. I see several people here who are on the program there. It's going to be a good conference. So that's an in-person meeting, 26th of April in Sheffield, England, of course, in case there's other Sheffields around the world. So without, because we've got two papers instead of three, we have a bit more time at the end of today's session, unless our two speakers overrun. So if you've got anything you want to share with everybody, just to tell us what you're doing or thinking about, or any questions to ask, please do after we've had our two papers. One of the things we will talk about after the two speakers is we're planning to be involved in a session on child being 200 this year. We're hoping to have some online input to the American Folklore Society in November, which I'll tell you about later if we have time. So here we go. We're going to go to Michael, who appositely is going to talk about Mr. Child, the very one. Are you there, Michael? You're muted. You need to unmute. Oh, there we go. We can't hear you, Michael. Are you still muted?
He is muted.
He is muted. Michael, you're muted.
Yes, I know. It always goes wrong, doesn't it?
It certainly does. But we can see that. Not your first slide, though.
Here I am. I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted.
Please stop sharing and start again. I knew I would screw this up.
Don't worry. As I said, we have plenty of time. Yeah, we have that.
Okay. Can we go? There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
All right. Ready? Can
Yes,
you all
we're
see
ready.
it? Okay. Mr. Child Songster. In 1861, 1 year married, 36-year-old Harvard professor Francis James Child undertook two musical projects to assist in raising public funds for the Sanitary Commission, the precursor to the American Red Cross. The Boylston Professor of Rhetoric and Oratory for over a decade, already famous for his 1857-59 collection of English and Scottish ballads, Child proposed, quote, to get up a musical entertainment for which tickets should be sold and the proceeds given to the commission. The result was a pasticcio opera in Italian, Il Pescobello, based on the immortal poem One Fishball by George Martin Lane, Harvard's professor of Latin, with an Italian libretto by Child, an English translation by his friend, the poet and professor of modern languages and literatures, James Russell Lowell, and choral and recitative parts by a young John Knowles Payne, Harvard's new organ instructor and America's first symphonic composer. Thanks to Child's student M.A. DeWolf Howe, we know a great deal about the composition and performance history of Il Pescobello. Thanks to Professor Mary Ellen Brown, we can even hear it performed on an Indiana University recording. Of Child's second musical project, War songs for Freemen we know much less. Undertaken at the same time as the opera and published in early 1862, Child's Songster originally contained 30 songs, later 31, by 11 noted authors, musicians, and poets, including Charles Jeffrey Leland, founder of the Gypsy Lore Society, Edward Everett Hale, author historian, best known for his short story, The Man Without a Country, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., autocrat of the breakfast table, Julia Ward Howe, who had just published the Battle Hymn of the Republic, the founder of the Transcendentalist Club, F.H. Hedge, who contributed the first English translation of Martin Luther's A Mighty Fortress Is Our God, Charles T. Brooks, America's leading translator of German, the earlier mentioned John Knowles Paine, and 3 by Child himself. The songster went through 4 editions in 1863 and 2 reprintings in 1864, and was distributed to at least 3 Massachusetts regiments, as well as 2 regiments of the New York Volunteers. All the songs made their first appearance in the Songster. Several were afterwards independently issued as sheet music by Oliver Ditson Incorporating, the leading music publisher in the country. Some were at hand poems, which were set to music. Holmes' Liberty and Union had already appeared in the Atlantic Monthly. 5 songs have no attributed author, and 9 have unattributed tunes. Formally, the songs are part of the cheap print song tradition, that is, new lyrics written for existing tunes, as in the case of Child's Overtures from Richmond, whose subtitle is A New Lillabolero. 9 are set to military band or drinking song tunes. 1 uses Dumas' 1848 Mourir pour la Patrie, the French national anthem during the Second Republic. 1 of Paine's is set to the Gregorian chant O Sanctissima. 8 are set to identified traditional tunes: Jenny's Bobby, Duncan Gray, Who'll Be King But Charlie, Lillabolero, Frankfurt Apprentice's Song, For A and That and A high-toned Southern gentleman to Dan Emmett's 1840s hit, The Fine Old Colored Gentleman, My Love's But a Lassie, The Lass of Patey's Mill, and 1 set to an anonymous Flemish air. During the Civil War centennial celebrations, 3 were recorded: Child's Overtures from Richmond, the Dan Emmett-based high-toned Southern Gentleman by the folk singer Jerry Silverman on the Folkways Songs of the Civil War collection, and Child's Why and Wherefore by Tennessee Ernie Ford and Bobby Horton on their similarly named Songs of the Civil War albums. Interestingly, Child did not list himself as editor of the collection. Other than his authorial credits, his sole editorial mention is as the holder of the copyright. Likewise, there is no evidence of who chose the tunes or transcribed the music, though it is probable that Knowles Paine oversaw that responsibility. The printed songster was divided into 3 parts: a dedication, a preface consisting of 2 quotes, and the songs themselves. Each song was presented as a text with a printed tune. The first and second editions of the songsters were dedicated to regiments already fighting or about to go into the fray. The first was the 20th Massachusetts, which was locally known as the Harvard Regiment. The additional Massachusetts regiments were the 2nd and the 15th. All served 3-year enlistments, with perhaps the most historically important action of any being that of the 15th, when it filled the gap in the Bloody Angle and helped repel Pickett's charge at Gettysburg on July 3, 1863. Importantly, neither Child nor any of his fellow Cambrians saw their songs as folk songs. There is anecdotal evidence that several were sung by the troops and that some were used as marching songs by regimental bands. But in their times, they would have been accounted as examples of the brass band, sentimental, and comic songs of the era. Child and his fellow songsters were not attempting to be entertainers, however. Their songs were explicitly propagandist. They preached, they exhorted, they evangelized. Above all, Child's lyricists wrote to sustain the fighting soldiers' belief that they were participants in a righteous cause, to make clear that Southerners were an enemy to be defeated and not fellow Americans, and to announce that freedom and the national soul were at stake. These goals were evident from the first pages of the songster. In the place of a preface, Child published 2 long quotes, one drawn from a widely reprinted lecture on poetry to working class men in England in 1852 by the radical English minister Frederick William Robertson, and a second from an article by the radical philosopher John Stuart Mill, the author of On Liberty, in which Mill justified his support for the Northern cause. Both quotes make clear that from their outset that internecine warfare, though terrible, was sometimes necessary. Quote, "Carnage is terrible," Robertson wrote. "The conversion of producers into destroyers is a calamity. Death and human features obliterated beneath the hoof of the war horse, and reeking hospitals, and ruined commerce, and violated homes, and broken hearts. They are all awful. But," he continued, "there is something worse than death. Cowardice is worse, and the decay of enthusiasm and manliness is worse. And worse than both of those is when, quote, a people has gravitated down into the creed that the wealth of nations consists not in men, but in silk and cotton and something they call capital. Peace was blessed," he finished, "but if the price to be paid for peace is that wealth accumulate and men decay, better far that every street in every town of our once noble country should run blood." Mill's quote was even more direct. The war could have only one, he announced, that the whole of the territories be maintained as free soil. It would take time, he went on, quote, to lower the arrogance and tame the aggressive ambition of the slave owners. But the loss of life required, he continued, was, quote, not the greatest evil which a nation can suffer. Far worse was, quote, the decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling which arose when a people were, quote, mere human instruments for firing cannon or thrusting bayonets in the service of and for the selfish purposes of a master. Mill's sworn enemy was the tyrannical injustice of Southern life, and he declared, if a war stands against it, if it was fought for an honest purpose and by free choice, then it was not degradation to fight, but often the means of a nation's regeneration. How the various songs express these sentiments, of course, is the best measure of their political intentions. To make the case for those intentions, I will use the rest of my time to explicate Child's three contributions. Here is Child's The Why and the Wherefore, as sung by Bobby Horton. Note that Horton has dropped the first line repetition present in the German original and called for in Child's lyrics.
Where are you bound, young man? I'm off to the war with a good men and true, and hadn't you better come along too? I speak my mind quite freely now, really. Why to the war, young man? Did a man ever fight for a holier cause than freedom and flag and equal laws? Just speak your mind quite freely now, really. Which is the flag of the free? Oh, Washington's flag with the stripes and the stars. Will you give such a name to the thing with the bars? I speak my mind quite freely now, really. Who goes with you to the war? 10,000 brave lads, and if they should stay here, the girls will cry shame and they'd volunteer. They speak their mind quite freely now, really. Rebellion is crushed and the union restored and freedom is safe, yes then please the Lord, I speak my mind quite freely now, really. What will you gain by that? Oh, I've gained enough, whatever the cost. If freedom, the hope of the world, is at lost, I speak my mind quite freely now, really.
The lyrics are set to the Frankfurt Apprentices song, S, S, S und S, it, and it, one of the most famous journeyman songs of the 19th century. Today it is mainly sung by members of the few still existing associations of building craftsmen in schools and by choirs. In Child's hands, the apprentices' questions about their required traveling from one job to the next are transformed into classic writer's prompts to justify why good men should go to war. In substance, his lyrics are the recruiting song that a professor of rhetoric, oratory, and composition might write. Each stanza begins with 2 lines of a repeated question using one of the traditional prompt words, where, why, which, who, when, what, to encourage a listener to progress from thinking about enlisting to justifying the fight as a holy cause, to symbolizing the war as a choice between George Washington's flags and the South's revolting parody, to the women's view, to the possible price for joining the fight, to finally the sacrifice one would be willing to make to ensure that if freedom, the hope of the world, isn't lost. Importantly, Child's Composition 101 in song employs 2 particular tropes to make its point. His speaking soldier is not a bold cavalier going to war. He is one of an American New Model army composed of, quote, good men and true. Moreover, he wars not for glory's sake, but to, quote, fight for a holier cause. His battle cry is, quote, freedom's flag and equal laws, and not some wild rebel yell. Child's volunteers are Washington's men. They are the men who shudder to be branded unworthy by valiant women who would willingly replace them if they shirked their duty. They are boys who, at the last lines make clear, serve a higher universal democratic credo, soldiers who are not coerced to serve, but who make their own choices and own those choices once they are made. Child used 2 specific ploys to make his case for Northern superiority. First, his Northern girls are written as aggressive partners in the war effort. They are the they who will volunteer to replace the shameful men in ways that by implication Southern girls would never suggest and Southern soldiers would never allow. Antebellum Southern gender norms idealized Southern women as sheltered, deferential beings who willingly accepted their subordination to men. In contrast, Child's Northern girls have their own voices, and they are not afraid to use them whether the men like it or not. Indeed, as Child writes them, that is their virtue. Second, his claim to Washington's flag frames Northern soldiers as the true heirs of America's past. And when coupled with his recurrent use of freedom as the war's goal, rather than the favored Southern choice, liberty, he extends the original revolutionary aim from white men to black slaves in a way that Southern strategy can never do. Child does not mention slavery. He doesn't have to. The existence of 8 million slaves in the Confederacy in 1861 leaves no doubt that freedom can never be a Southern metaphor or a Southern goal. Child's second song, Overtures from Richmond, is a classic broadside composition whose lyrics are simple, self-explanatory, and intentionally provocative and incrementally enraging. Again, notice that the singer will alter Child's text.
Well, Uncle Sam says Jefferson D. Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam, you'll have to join my Confederacy. Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, that don't appear, oh, that don't appear, says old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, filibustero, that don't appear, says old Uncle Sam. So Uncle Sam, just lay down your arms, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam. Then you shall hear my reasonable terms, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, I'd like to hear, oh, I'd like to hear, says old Uncle Sam. Lero, I'd like to hear, says old Uncle Sam. First you must own I've beat you in fight, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam. Then that I always have been in the right, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, rather severe, says old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, filibustero, rather severe, says old Uncle Sam. Slavery's of course the chief cornerstone, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam, of our new civilization, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, that's quite sincere, says old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, filibustero, that's quite sincere, says old Uncle Sam. And by the way, one little thing more, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam, you're to refund the costs of the war, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, that leaves me zero, says old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, filibustero, that leaves me zero, says Uncle Sam. These terms you fully consent, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam, I'll be perpetual King President, Lily Burlero, old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, take your sombrero, off to your swamp, says old Uncle Sam. Lero, Lero, filibustero, cut double quick, says old Uncle Sam.
Set to the famous marching song attributed to Henry Purcell that, as Samuel Pepys opined, drove James II out of 3 countries and once had a more powerful effect than either the Philippics of Demosthenes or Cicero. Child attempts to recreate the mood and music that helped drive the Glorious Revolution. Precisely following the original text, Child presents a 10-stanza dialogue between Jefferson Davis and Uncle Sam, in which Davis, as primary speaker, lists the Southern demands, and a skeptical, sardonic, and finally angry Uncle Sam responds by asserting that the ideal solution would be that the North join my Confederacy. Uncle Sam defers that doesn't appear so, and Davis suggests in turn that the North lay down their arms and, quote, hear my reasonable terms. Child rouses his audience by having Davis call for Uncle Sam to admit that he was beaten, that the South was right to secede, that the North must assume Southern debt, ignore Southern assets, pay off Southern gambling losses, refund Southern war expenses, that Northerners debase themselves by valorizing Cavalier blood and declaring Puritans sprang from the mud, shades of Harry Potter, that they declare slavery is the chief cornerstone of the nation, that they admit that they are a recreant, cowardly tool, and end with a demand that they agree to substitute constitutional monarchy for Republican democracy. If to these terms the North consents, then Davis promises, I'll be perpetual king president. Finally fed up, Uncle Sam gets the last word when he dismisses Davis with, take your sombrero, most probably a reference to the famous cavalry hat Davis chose when Secretary of War, and head to your swamps double quick, a reference to hiding in the South Carolina swamps. Child's third song, The Last Pamunkey, is the simplest in tone of his contributions.
Your groves and glens I ne'er admired, and oh, your broom and books they pour also of Burnside's all but one I'm tired, and of their bonny lasses also, the man that sings the banks of doom, and praise I hold him but a donkey, my heart beats to another tune, and that's the banks of the Pamunkey.
The singer is a friend who bravely took on the task because, well, he has heard me sing. He said he's sure that anyone else can do it better than he, and one stanza was all he could take on. Pamunkey still is the most charming of Charles Songster lyrics. It begins with the singer rejecting all the traditional perfect lassie songs he has heard before. He's not quite as droll as, say, Cole Porter or Noel Coward might be, or as biting as Lerner and Lowe's Show Me from My Fair Lady, though his pun on Union General Ambrose Burnside's name is a winner. His primary target is the Scottish Romantic poet's well-known sentimental attraction for the lassies, which he evokes by using Alan Ramsay's tune for the Lass of Patey's Mill, to sound his rejection of Scottish tradition. It's not that he objects to Burns or Ramsay or the lassies. Rather, he is proposing a new American love song, one fit for contemporary times and contesting American identities. The first three stanzas of Charles' new love song are a ladder of negatives. The first takes on Burns, the second Ramsay, and ends with a call for a new style. The third supplies the twist. After dismissing both Burns' Banks of Cree and Flow Sweetly Fair Afton, Child demands we sing a new kind of maiden, true and kind, who is described lovingly as trim, handy, quiet, sweet, and spunky. A setup that makes possible the appropriate rhyme with Pamunkey, but also allows him to describe her personality in the last stanza as not too nice or coy, but instead as soft-eyed, watching all loving over your land's defender, which in turn, a playfulness which in turn concludes in the final stanza, when under the watchful care of his noble nurse, the wounded soldier goes from being a wretched shade to someone who is now strong and growing chunky. We have seen Child use women before to argue for different sectional imaginaries. Again, he never mentions Southern womanhood directly. It is eminently possible that his lass is Southern by birth, since McClellan's Virginia Peninsula campaign had made the Pamunkey a staging depot early in the war, and she may have been one of those who remained and were Union tooth and nail. But whatever she is, she rejects the traditional gendered virtues at the heart of Southern culture, and by her behavior becomes an eponym of a truer, better American womanhood. Nursing was not something that young or upper-class women did. A lass who took on the task was already making herself as someone made of stronger stuff, someone who would not desert the cause she had asked good men to fight, nor abandon such men if their sacrifice caused great injury. In this she stands as a forerunner to Louisa May Alcott, herself a Civil War nurse, whose Jo Marsh would become our American standard for the scrappy, rebellious, intelligent girl whose fierce honesty and fiercer loyalties are the lodestars for any American girl with ideas, ambitions, and the strength of character to realize them. Let me conclude with a long, very Jamesian quote from the American author Henry James, and a short coda. Remembering his and William's daily luncheon with Child at Mrs. Upsham's table d'hote in Cambridge in 1862, James wrote, I see that there was the American spirit, since I was after it, of a quality deeply inbred, beautifully adjusted to all extensions of knowledge and taste, and, as seemed to me, quite sublimely quickened by everything that was at the time so tremendously in question, so that what I still most retain of him most is the very flush and mobility, the living expansion and contraction, the bright comedy and almost lunar eclipse of his cherubic face, according to things as they appeared to be going for the country. I was always just across from him, and I remember well how vivid a clock face it came to me, and how while that tense season lasted was my wonder for the signs and portents, the quips and cranks, the wreathed smiles, or otherwise candid obscurations of our prime talker's presented visage. How, thanks to the perpetual play of sympathy and irony, confidence and scorn, he struck me on the bad days, which were so many, as a fairly august cherubism and all, for sincerity of association with every light and shade, every ebb and flow of our cause. When he most shone out, however, so that depression wasn't a gloom in him, but a darting flame, was in the icy attitude of in the icy air of the attitude of the European nations to us, which drew from him at once all the drolleries and asperties of his sarcasm. Nothing more particularly touched me in him, for it lingers in a light of his own, than the fashion after which he struck me as a fond, grave guardian, not so much of the memory and the ashes yet awhile, as of the promise in all its flower of the sacrificed young men whom the university connection has passed through his hands, and whom he looked out for with a tenderness of interesting, nursing pride that was contagious as I could possibly have wished it. End quote. I can think of no greater epitaph for Child's songster, except that perhaps we join James and claim his political conscience as ancestor to our own. It would be a radical choice. Social justice is too often imagined as a glaring absence in our past, and scholars like Child are too often dismissed as retrograde and regressive on issues of political importance. Honoring the Child of the war songs for freedom, for his attempt to sway the minds and comfort the hearts of men in a war fought for freedom and equality, would be a certain reminder that a great deal of our discipline's past, none more so than its politics, still waits to be mapped. Thank you. I'm done.
Much, Michael. Thank you. Want to unshare so that we can see everybody?
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We do have time for questions. I didn't know Child was a feminist or a proto-feminist.
He was an absolute feminist, literally to the point that the president of Harvard cautioned him about spending too much time with young women, trying to educate them at Radcliffe.
Man.
Literally, he was cautioned not to spend too much time at the Radcliffe Institute with the young women.
All right. Okay.
Oh.
Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, and others, if you want to raise your hand, if you want to ask a question, go down to, what's it called now? Is it reactions? React at the bottom there, and you can raise your hand. Where is Pamunkey?
Pamunkey is on, so if you see the state of Virginia, it's up toward the northeast Maryland border, southern Maryland border. It was where the Union Army, in the first years of George McClellan, when the Songster was put out, had set up their headquarters. It was the one piece of land in Virginia that they had taken. Most of the people fled. The people who remained are known in American history as people Union tooth and nail. So they were that small part of the Virginia population that stayed on the side of the Union during the conflict.
He was very brave, having a song with lines ending in chunky and funky.
Funky.
Funky, chunky. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. I mean, you know, and I will say that what you just heard sung is probably the first time it's been sung since the period in which it was written, if it was sung at all. Though I kind of really desperately hope that it was. It's so perfect. I hope someone sang it around a campfire.
But nobody else has got their hand up, so I'll ask another question. You said that the songs were definitely, you think the songs were sung by the troops at the time, but none of them, from what I could see, entered into the folk.
No. There are one or two songs in, and again, that is a reference to, I'm going to lose the name. That's a reference to a scholar who said that that there was some evidence, but he actually didn't cite the evidence. I just quoted it. But no, they probably didn't enter into tradition, or if they did for a short period and then went out. I mean, because remember, they are contained in the Songster. Pretty much every soldier in a regiment got a copy of the Songster. Because they actually made from the Songster in something close to $1,000 in sales that was given to the Sanitary Commission.
Right.
In total, between that and the opera, they contributed almost $4,000 to the Sanitary Commission.
Karen, you got your hand up. Karen?
Yes, I may have missed something. I just want to know whether the Songster is available digitally online anywhere.
Yes, it is. It is available digitally online from the Library of Congress. You can see a copy there. Watch to see the first, we have no copies digitally that I know of the first edition. But second and third edition copies are there. You'll notice some changes. When they did the two reprints, they just had extra pages. So they stuck in random songs in the back that weren't part of the original Songster, just in case you wanted something to sing along with.
Right.
And as I said, it's a curious document when you realize that the A Mighty Fortress is Our God, that's literally the first English translation of that song. So that's one we're pretty sure might have come out and gone into the religious tradition, because this is the first place that it appeared. It was one of the ones that was then reprinted by Oliver Ditson, which starts it in the American scene as a musical piece, probably then picked up by the churches to sing, the Lutheran churches especially to sing. So, okay, Steve, I have a question for you. Can
Okay.
we get them round numbers?
Not not unless we can prove that anybody actually sang them later. If they did
Okay.
the tradition, they get a round number. They can get another number, what I call a V number, which is any old song can get that kind of number.
I
But if you slip me a few
just thought a
numbers, I
child
can
song with a
have a
round number would be worth the price of admission.
okay. I'll see what I can do. Right, no other questions then. Thank you, Michael. We're going to
You're
move
welcome.
on.
Thank you all for listening.
Going to move on to Hillary. I've lost you, Hillary. You must be there somewhere.
I'm here.
Oh, you're there. Okay. Hillary Warner Evans, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget to share sound.
Yep, I have that. Okay.
That's good. We
Okay.
have that. Excellent.
Okay, so my presentation is today is about songs of Bert Bailey, who was a summer resident of Phippsburg, Maine. And I'll be talking about the strategies that he used to make his songs seem local to the area where he was spending summers in Phippsburg, and also in the process speculating a bit on how he might have gotten the ideas for some of these songs. And this is actually based on the first part of one of my dissertation chapters, and I there's a lot of detail here, and I've had to cut out some of it even to make this presentation short enough. So, yeah, happy to take extra questions at the end if people have more are curious about other things. Um, okay, so here you can see where Maine is located in the United States. And this is where Phippsburg is in red down in the southern part of the state. And this is a map of the town of Phippsburg, which has different villages in it. And so I'm going to be referring to some of these places throughout my presentation. And there's Bert Bailey on the left. He taught botany and other subjects at a Quaker boarding school outside Philadelphia called Westtown School. Um, and he started coming up to Small Point in Phippsburg with his family for the summer in the late 1920s. Bert and his wife Helen had 3 children, and when their oldest daughter Betty died of leukemia in her senior year of high school in 1934, they decided to buy the former boys' sailing camp that they'd been staying at for the last couple of years in her memory. And that summer, they also invited her friends up for a house party, and the group started visiting locals in a fishing village called Sabasco. Eventually, they started doing service projects such as building houses and a wharf that would be accessible at low tide, starting a knitting business, credit union, and community garden, and a weekly play hour. And this was the beginning of Three Fevers Camp, which Bert and Helen continued to run until around 1949, eventually with both non-local high school graduates and local teenagers from the different villages in Phippsburg. And this other picture is a picture of the beach at the camp. But Bert also had a connection to Maine through about 15 songs that he wrote about the Maine coast. And several people tell the story that when he first came to Maine, he wanted to find local folk music, but all the local musicians were playing country western music that they heard on the radio. So he decided to write his own songs. So in this story, the concept of locality is linked to people's conception of the songs today. My knowledge of the text of Bert's songs is mostly from a manuscript that was put together shortly before his death. That's called Saltwater Ballads and Some Not So Salt. And my of the context is mostly from a lot of archival research at the Phippsburg Historical Society and a few oral history interviews. So, Bert's songs are all fictional, but many of them mention real local people and places. 7 of them mention specific places in Phippsburg. Harry Herman takes place in Popham and mentions Parker Head, and The No Head Man takes place in Small Point. Maggie and the Deep Sea Lobsterman mention Casco Bay, the body of water to the southwest of Phippsburg, and the Horse Ballad, or the Ice Cutting Horse, mentions the Kennebec River, which forms the eastern boundary of the town. Sandy McNabb and the Big Bull Moose both mention the town of Phippsburg itself, and the latter one also refers to Sagadahoc County. Others of Bert's songs take place on the Maine coast or on the sea more generally. A Ballad of Camden Town is an outlier in that it mentions a specific place in Maine. Well, there's lots of Camdens, so we don't really know if this is Camden, Maine. But if it's Camden, Maine, it mentions a specific place in Maine that is not connected to Phippsburg. It's a different part of the state. While one version of The Widow mentions Townsend's Cove, which is possibly a reference to the Townsend Gut in nearby Boothbay Harbor, where campers went on several day trips over the years. The remaining 5 songs, James, The Ballad of Marianne McGee, The Whale Song, Barney Bones, and The Boat Song, have a more general maritime setting. And of these 5, Marianne McGee is likely not set in Maine, but the others could plausibly be. So 3 of the songs also mention specific Phippsburg people or surnames. The main characters of the Big Bull Moose are Clifford and Dorothy Robinson, who lived in Phippsburg Center. Clifford was a ham radio operator and a local youth group leader. In notes about a camp project to refurbish school playgrounds, he was mentioned as someone who had a telephone wire to donate for sweets. He also served as one of the watchmen for a fire that broke out in Small Point in April 1948 and affected the Bailey property, and his son participated in a day camp at Three Fevers in the early 1950s after the overnight camp had ended. The Horse Ballad mentions Thomas Totman, who also lived in Center and was one of the town leaders. He was a representative for Phippsburg Center when there was a discussion held at Three Fevers in 1947 about the proposed consolidated school, and he was one of the leaders of a project to create a community center in summer 1949. Many of the Totman children worked on that project. His stepdaughters were campers in the late 1940s, and some of the younger Totman children attended the day camp in later years. Three Fevers Camp was also located on Totman Cove, which wasn't specifically named for Thomas, but probably for a member of his family. The song, The Ballad of Sandy McNabb, begins with a verse mentioning 4 common Phippsburg surnames, and it has the lines, "A man is a Wallace more often than not. You'll find Alexanders much thicker than flies, while Gilmans are mingled with Wymans and pies." In the Three Fevers collection at the Phippsburg Historical Society, I counted at least 35 Wallaces, and the town's population at this time was about 1,000 people, so there were quite a few of them at that time. A few of the Wallaces were especially involved in projects started by the Baileys and their campers. Early leaders of the knitting business were Abby Wallace and her daughter Edith Wallace of Sabasco and Nellie Wallace of West Point. Laffy Wallace was on the board of the Sabasco Credit Union, as was Edith Wallace. He was also a leader of the fish freezing business and one of the Sabasco representatives at the discussion about the consolidated school. and at least 10 Wallace teenagers were campers at Three Fevers over the years. There were also several Alexanders in Tabasco at the time. Although they did construction projects for other Alexander families, the Baileys and their campers interacted the most with Henry and Stella Alexander and their 13 children. Henry took campers out on his fishing boat, and many campers also saw him preach in his capacity as a lay preacher at the Tabasco Nazarene Church and elsewhere. Stella Alexander was on the committee for the garden project, and several of their children were campers, including Bud Alexander, who lived with the Baileys in Pennsylvania for a short period of time and later helped out at camp as an adult. Their daughter Edith also lived in one of the houses built by Three Fevers campers. There were also Gilmans and Wymans who were community leaders at the time of camp. Stan Gilman of Small Point was the school superintendent, and Peggy, his wife, was a teacher, so both were well-versed in youth issues of the time, and the couple donated the land originally used for the community garden. In 1940, Grace Wyman was a teacher in Parkerhead, and Raymond Wyman, who is not in the same household, was a selectman, which is basically like a local town government in New England. Numerous Wyman and Gilman children also attended both overnight and day portions of the camp. Two separate Pye families held the role of caretakers for Three Fevers property during the winter. First, this was married couple Morris and Myrtle Pye, and later brothers Douglas and Al Pye, who were not the children of Morris and Myrtle, and several Pye children also attended the camp. So Bailey's songs also signify localness in less obvious ways than name dropping. So the description of the physical environment is realistic to that found in Phippsburg. The Big Bull Moose, for example, mentions that Phippsburg is a place where, quote, the air is fog and the soil is rock, and it refers to the woods of pine and spruce. And these were aspects that took on meaning for campers. They're mentioned several times in the camp logs. One of the meaningful places at camp was called Grandfather's Grove. This was a stand of evergreens where the understory was cleared by Helen's father, Samuel Smedley. This became a picnicking spot and is marked on a map of camp made for a Christmas card by artist Ruth Rhodes Lepper in the late 1940s. And camper Bill Matchett wrote a song about Three Fevers in the 40s that was based on The Walloping Window Blind, which mentions the prevalent fog in the area with the lines, quote, "We'd tell you how the place looks now if they'd only lift the fog." A poem by Burt about house building that appeared in a log from 1938 refers to the roof, quote, "admitting sunshine, fog, and storm," and a letter from his daughter Betty to her friend Mick from 1933 mentions the dense fog that occurred one morning. Fog is also mentioned in Bailey's song The Whale. The presence of rock where there should be soil or water is humorously referred to throughout much camp material. The Bailey's boat was called the Rock Hopper because of all the rocks it hit in the water, and there were several tongue-in-cheek references in logs to the boat hitting rocks. There are also references to the rocky soil in the area. A takeoff on the Old Oaken Bucket, which was written by the Steer family when the parents visited their children at camp in 1940, contains the line, "And the lane to the camp, well, each rock is there still." Also, the role of the water is realistic to how it would have been seen by Phippsburgers of the time. Dick Kelly, who was a contemporary singer who performed many of Bailey's songs around Phippsburg earlier in the 21st century, noted that in Bailey's songs, quote, "The water is someplace you work and you make your living, and in many cases you are dead." Although most of Bailey's songs are comic, several of them include drowning or death or the allusion to the possibility. Harry Herman is caught on the mudflats as the tide rises. The husband of the widow has recently drowned. Barney Bones is washed aboard. And the narrator of Maggie says, quote, "I have a notion an ocean grave is waiting around for me." The two maritime-themed songs that do not take place in Maine, The Ballad of Marion McGee and A Ballad of Camden Town, also involve death at sea. On the other hand, the land is portrayed positively in contrast to the water and its associations with danger, hard work, and death. The widow states that she has roots in the land and also that I dread the wind and I hate the sea because it took away her husband. The land here is a space of security and the sea is a space of predictability. After Barney Bones survives a near drowning, he swapped his dragger for a farm 11 miles from shore, where he's raising beans and corn and greens, and he never swears no more. While in the song, Barney is portrayed as an immoral man at sea, he reforms himself when he gets to land. The songs also have realism in how animals are portrayed. In The Big Bull Moose, Clifford Robinson finds a moose in his pea patch, tries to scare it away by throwing a cobble at it, and has to climb a tree to escape. His wife Dorothy sensibly lures the moose away with food. According to their daughter Martha, there was a story about her mother seeing a moose while weeding pole beans. When people asked Dorothy what she did when she saw it, she reportedly said, I just kept on weeding. Although Clifford sees the moose first in the song, it is Dorothy who is the calm, collected one in both stories, indicating that Martha's story might have been an inspiration for Bert's song. Camp logs have several references to seeing moose tracks, and the map on the Christmas card that I previously mentioned had a picture of that animal in the middle with the word moose and an exclamation point. Barbara Vickery, who was somebody from another Quaker family that historically and still does summer in Phippsburg, and her family also sang Bert's songs. She noted that the song's realism when she said, any of us living down there could have written a song like that because we had seen moose in our peas. Bert's granddaughter, Eliza Allison, told a story about a moose on the Three Fevers property after camp was no longer happening, testifying to the narrative-worthy potential of seeing such an animal. In her story, her father was working on the camp's water system. A moose walked right by him, and he could not see it while everyone else at camp was yelling, Charlie, look! More generally, the moose is the state animal of Maine and the subject of many personal experience narratives. In Driver's Ed, Maine teenagers are taught about the perils of running into a moose on the road, and some people have stories they tell about just such an event. Burt Bailey's song, Eliza and Martha's stories, and the genre of stories of encounters with moose while driving all involve the intrusion of a somewhat special and potentially dangerous animal into everyday life. While Bailey's song was unrealistic in some ways, since moose don't eat shredded wheat, it bears similarities with narratives of real encounters with a particular animal in a particular place. The Whale is another song that focuses on an encounter with a local large animal and its frightening nature. Whales are gentle, but their size can inspire fear in fishermen. According to Dick Kelly, lobsterman John Murphy of Sebasco, who sometimes took kids out in his boat, was afraid of them. Bailey's song describes this fear. The whale, quote, makes the fisherman pale more than the fog and the gale, which are both things that pose danger to boats. The narrator states that the sight of the whale would make you shiver right out of your fisherman's clothes. Although campers themselves seem to enjoy seeing whales, as they were mentioned in logs as being seen on trips to Monhegan, Bert's song here focuses on the perspective of the local fishermen. At least two of Bert's songs rely on local history and legend. One of these is the horse ballad, or the ice-cutting horse. This song takes place, quote, when schooners were loaded with Kennebec ice, and it tells the story of Thomas Topman's horse, who dies after being insulted, is frozen in a pond, and then put on a ship down to Baltimore in a block of ice. Although Thomas Topman never had a horse and was not involved in ice cutting, Bert would have known about the historical importance of the ice cutting industry in the area. A letter from Betty to Mick mentions a walk to a place on the Kennebec on which, quote, there is a pole where they used to signal the ice ships when the river was navigable. Barbara Jacob, who was the daughter of two of the original campers, mentions in a school report that's in the West Town School archives that there was a thriving ice business at the end of the 19th century, and that the Kennebec ice industry began when a ship got frozen in the ice near Pittston, which is further north than Phippsburg, and later sailed to Baltimore in the spring loaded with river ice. By 1860, quote, cities began to depend on Kennebec ice, and, quote, in 1890, Horse Island Harbor in Sebasco was the largest of any other ice establishment in Phippsburg. The pond was called Horse Island Pond and had wharves for big ships to dock at. Although Sebasco is on the New Meadows side of Phippsburg and not the Kennebec side, the fact that there was an ice industry at an island named for horses may have prompted Bert to write a song about a horse involved in the ice industry. And when the campers were working on refurbishing the building that became the community house by Center Pond, a project that was actually started by Thomas Totman, they found ice cutting tools on the second floor of the building. The presence of the tools and the location of the building may have been additional inspiration for this song. The No-Head Man has some basis in local folklore. It's from the perspective of a pirate ghost murdered by Captain Kidd over a dispute about buried treasure, who now haunts the mouth of Small Point Harbor. Inspiration for this song may have come from early stories that the campers heard. In 1936, there was a report of some of them spending a Monday evening visiting neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. McIntyre, who were referred to as Mr. and Mrs. Mac. They were, quote, told of ghosts of the locality and returned later with weird tales of Aliquippa treasure. And Aliquippa is located at the mouth of Cape Small Harbor. A later camp log with the news of Mr. Mac's death mentioned that he, quote, had told many legends of Small Point, and legends of Captain Kidd were also generally present in the area, including in my neighboring hometown of West Bath. So the last piece of detail I'm going to talk about is the relationship between Bert's songs and the Phippsburg economy. And most of the songs discuss maritime occupations such as lobstering, fishing, clamming, and boat building, which were the primary way that a lot of people in Phippsburg at the time made their living. All three of Bert's songs about lobstering imply a lobster shortage, which was something that was a problem at the time. And in Bert's song James, the lobsterman only has dogfish taking his bait despite the effort he puts in. When he does catch lobsters, they are small, meaning that they would be less valuable and might even have to be thrown back. The narrator of Maggie also laments the lobster shortage with the lines, "There's hardly a lobster in Casco Bay, and fishing has all gone to smash." The narrator of The Deep Sea Lobsterman notes that there is more competition for lobsters inshore, but he can make more money and work less by setting traps further out to sea and thereby avoiding the crunch that hurts other lobstermen. And there were some successful deepwater lobstermen in Small Point in the Three Rivers Camp era. Two of Bert's songs feature clammers. Harry Herman contains many specific realistic details. Harry boasts that he can dig 6 barrels of clams on a 10-foot tide, which is about the highest tide that Popham gets. And a greater tidal range means that more mudflats would be exposed, and that allows the possibility of digging more clams. Verse 5 goes, Harry Herman, when the moon was full, gave his hoe a polish and his boots a pull. He took his skiff and was waiting round right on the spot where the tide went down. Tides tend to be higher at the full and new moons, and although not all clammers operate this way, I've also personally observed the practice of clammers sitting in a boat, waiting for the tide to go out and expose the mudflats. Harry also refers to bushel and peck, the traditional measurements of clams, and the song indicates how difficult clamming is physically, as it mentions that he has 2 sore arms and an aching back. The other Bert Bailey song about clam digging, The Clam Digger's Lament, expresses the difficulties of winter clamming, which was often a seasonal supplemental activity for lobstermen in Sebasco and West Point when the seas were too rough to go lobstering. The Clam Digger's Lament has several lines about the north wind and how cold it is. The clamor in the song is also at the mercy of the tide and has to go out early in the morning because that's when low tide is. In addition to poor clothing that doesn't keep the cold out, he also has to contend with depressed prices and not being able to find clams. Sandy McNabb and Barney Bones refer to other types of fish caught commercially in Phippsburg, including cod, whiting, and hake. Barney Bones is portrayed as an immoral man who runs a trawler and overfishes the ocean. Both in Phippsburg and in eastern Nova Scotia, where Bert and Helen visited with a few of their campers to learn about the Antigonish movement, there were problems with large offshore trawlers being able to catch a lot of fish and flood markets to the detriment of independent fishermen. These situations may have led Bert Bailey to make the villain in Barney Bones the owner of a trawler. Finally, the boat song is about boat building. Although in Phippsburg's past there had been several commercial shipyards, there were no large operations by the time the Baileys started summering there. But there were still small operations building wooden fishing boats. Charlie Gomes ran a boatyard in Sebasco building wooden boats, and he built Bert and Helen's rock hopper. And Will Dunning, who's also mentioned in the archival record, repaired boats. The boat song details the process of building a wooden boat, laying the keel, cutting strips for the sides, sanding, and painting. It also refers to woods that were traditionally used in Maine wooden boat construction, oak for the keel and pine for the sides. So, so this presentation's mostly been me giving you a whole lot of detail about Bert Bailey's songs and explaining how they fit into the local culture and environment of the time when he was writing them. I don't necessarily have any grand thoughts to sum this up today, but in the dissertation chapter that this is based on, I have a sort of part 2 where I complicate this concept that the songs express local sense of place, and I explain how actually the sense of place in these songs is more similar to how summer people would have seen Phippsburg, and also how contemporary locals see Phippsburg rather than the locals of the time period of Three Fevers Camp. And that's why they differ in tone from other types of local songs in the genre. And so that's actually the topic of my presentation that I'm giving remotely at the Sheffield Song and Sense of Place conference. So that's about all I have for today, but I'm happy to take any questions about the songs or Bert Bailey or Three Fevers Camp, and I do have some recordings that were made of Dick Kelly and other people singing Bert's songs around 2010, if anybody wants to hear what some of them sound like.
Thank you, Hilary. Yes, please. We would like to hear
Yeah, please.
a song. Oh,
Okay, so oh man, can't seem to get out of the there we go. Okay. So does anybody have a request for which one they would like to hear? Big Bull Moose is my favorite, so
Okay.
I'm
Go for it. And I've heard you sing it too.
Phippsburg town in Saginaw, where the air is fog and the soil is rock. Oh, there amongst the pine and spruce you'll find the trail of the big bull moose. The big bull moose, the big bull moose, you'll find the trail of the big bull moose. Clifford Robinson on Friday night at 11 o'clock, when the moon was bright, found in his pea patch fast and loose 7 cows and a big bull moose. Oh, the big bull moose, the big bull moose, 7 cows and a big bull moose. Clifford Robinson never said please. He up and yelled, "Get out of them peas! Mind your carcass, you blank cayuse!" And he hove a cobble at the big bull moose. Oh, the big bull moose, the big bull moose. He hove a cobble at the big bull moose. Now bull moose tempers are somewhat short. He stomped his feet and he fetched a snort. And Clifford Robinson shinnied up a spruce to avoid the charge of the big bull moose. Oh, the big bull moose, the big bull moose, to avoid the charge of the big bull moose. Now Dorothy Robinson missed her spouse. She lit a lantern and went out of the house. And she called to Clifford, "Where may you be?" And Clifford answered from the top of the tree, "Well, go along home, I'm coming in soon. I just went up here to look at the moon." Says Dorothy, "That's a lame excuse, 'cause I smell the breath of the big bull moose." Oh, the big bull moose, the big bull moose. I smell the breath of the big bull moose. Now Dorothy Robinson stirred her feet. She filled a bucket with shredded wheat, with maple syrup and cream for juice. And she cried, "Here's Suki to the big bull moose." Oh, the big bull moose, the big bull moose. She cried, "Here's Suki to the big bull moose." Well, the bull moose wavered when he smelled the fare that Dorothy Robinson prepared with care. He got contented and declared a truce, and Clifford got away from the big bull moose. So the big bull moose, the big bull moose. Clifford got away from the big bull moose. Now Friday evenings at 11 o'clock, the bull moose hollers from the top of the rock. And he cries, "Maw!" which means produce shredded wheat for the big bull moose. So the big bull moose, the big bull moose, shredded wheat for the big bull moose. Well, there's always a moral to a truthful tale. Don't try a method that's bound to fail. It's kindness wins and not abuse. And it doesn't pay to fiddle with the big bull moose. So the big bull moose, the big bull moose. It doesn't pay to fiddle with the big bull moose. Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Hilary. And the Kellys, was that Mr. Kelly?
Yes, so Dick Kelly was the main singer on that album. So that's actually recordings from a CD called the Phippsburg Songbook, which was put out in 2012 as a fundraiser for the Historic Preservation Commission in Phippsburg. And the CD has several of Bert Bailey's songs on it. And it also has a few Phippsburg songs that were written by Dick Kelly, and one song that is a poem that his aunt wrote that he set to music. So he actually had a personal connection with Bert Bailey. He was also a student at West Town. And he was too young to be a camper at Three Fevers, but his sister was a camper at Three Fevers, and his cousin also was a camper at Three Fevers.
Great, thank you. Don't forget to ask questions. We have a bit of time. People, just raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Yes, George.
Yeah. Why Three Fevers?
Yeah, okay. So it's actually there's a book that was published in I think in the late 1920s or sometime in the 20s called Three Fevers, which was about fishing in I think northern England. And so the Three Fevers in the book refer to three different kinds of fish that were, well, I think one of them is lobsters. I think it's lobsters, salmon, and maybe cod. I don't remember. But yeah, so it's actually it refers to that book, which also was made into a movie sometime in the 30s.
Mm,
But the campers adopted this name because well, first of all, because a lot of their projects were working on helping a fishing village, but in the context of camp, the Three Fevers came to stand for um, a work fever, a play fever, and a fever of the spirit. So
mm,
I didn't really get into this in my presentation, but there were a lot of Quaker religious undertones and overtones to how camp was conceptualized, actually.
mm. Yeah, thanks very much. It's actually the author was Leo Walmsley.
Yeah.
Um, his son still lives up in Saratoga Springs.
Huh.
Um, yeah, it was Robin Hood's Bay in Northeast Yorkshire, and the film was Against the Tide, I think it was.
Yeah.
The film's recently been sort of put on a DVD, but it pops up on Talking Pictures TV over here. So yeah, Walmsley was what 1892 to 66, and he wrote quite a bit about those fishermen, and it seems to appeal to quite a lot of the fishermen still over here. It's very much in the sort of bit in well, Walmsley was a bit one of the early pioneers in grow your own food and this sort of thing. So
Oh, yeah.
you get the
That fits too.
if you Google Walmsley Society, I'm on the committee. You can find out more stuff about him.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
So,
I actually read the book.
mm,
And yeah, one of the things that I was struck by was the it actually there were parts of it that reminded me of the Deep Sea Lobsterman song because in the
mm,
part of the book there was a lot of concern about having to put the traps further out in the winter so that
mm,
storms don't destroy
mm,
them.
yeah. Yeah, I think there was some chap once went round all the local fishermen some years ago, said, I've got this idea for you, lobster pots that fold up when it's bad weather. And one said, all my pots fold up when it's bad weather. Yeah, he was quite an influential writer in his time. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you learn a lot at the TSF meetings, obviously. And here's another thing, Hilary. You mentioned Camden, and you said it might be the Camden in Maine, whereas I think it's Camden in London because
Yeah, then
that's where Cecil Sharp House is. So
yeah.
it's obviously a reference to Cecil Sharp in there somewhere.
There's also a Camden in New Jersey that's near
Across the river.
Philadelphia.
Yeah,
Yeah, and because Bert was from the Philadelphia area, I think it's possibly also that
yeah.
Camden. But yeah.
In which
I,
case, it'll be the first folk song ever written about Camden, New Jersey.
I presume, Hilary, that all the references to the people are are nice and kind, or a little bit jokey. They're not offensive in any way, as you would in some other traditional songs, where if somebody's mentioned in a song, it's not always a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is interesting because like I refer to these as local songs, but as many of you probably have noticed, they're quite different from what folklorists normally refer to as local songs. And yeah, so they're more fictionalized for one thing.
And Michael's got his hand up. You're muted, Michael. You're still muted. That's it.
Hillary, could you talk a little bit more about the Quaker relationship? Because the last thing you quoted, I mean, it's the spirit of light. Um, the theory of spreading grace. Was this actually a Quaker missionary moment, or was there a Quaker population that they went to join?
Oh, because because the thing that, so what did I quote that?
Well, it's just more that everything you described, the local changes they made, the credit union,
Yeah,
and the rest. These are
yeah,
all parts of sort of 1920s to 1950s Quaker culture in a very
yeah.
powerful way.
Hmm.
Was there a Quaker
Yes.
population there, or did they bring Quakerism to the region?
So actually, there were a few Quaker families that summered in Phippsburg. So Aliquippa that I mentioned
Hmm.
had some, and then I quoted Barbara Vickery. Her family was in another was another Quaker family in Phippsburg. And then there was also a community called Brightwater that Dick Kelly's family was part of. And they were not all Quakers, but had a lot of like sort of do good religious kind of origins for that community as well. And so there was kind of a summer population of Quakers in the area at this point. Um, and yeah, so Three Fevers Camp really actually was yeah, I think you can look at it as sort of like a mission effort. There's a lot of references in the camp logs and writing about the camp to the concept of friendship and trying to help the local people by forming relationships with them and being friends with them. There was also uh, sometimes there would be like visits between people in Brightwater and people in Three Fevers. Um, Sometimes people from Brightwater would come over to Three Fevers and have like religious philosophical discussions with the campers. Um, yeah, so it actually was a pretty big part of the camp and the
Mhm.
things that they were trying to accomplish there.
Thank you.
So thank you, Hilary. We have no more questions. We've managed to use up all the time. I said we had plenty of time this time, but we've used up all the time. Um, Thank you again to Michael and Hilary for very interesting papers and covering things that we haven't done before in the TSF meeting. So thanks especially for that. So I hope we'll see you all again on the 6th of April, and go to our website if you want to look at other things that are going on, and details of the Sheffield conference on the 26th of April. And that's it, I think, ladies and gentlemen. I hope we'll see you again soon. Thanks again to Hilary and Michael. And bye for now. Bye bye.